Welcome back to my channel. We are here to talk about Becoming Elizabeth, episode 2. I've also watched episode 3 by the time I'm recording this, so I have a little more information. But I like where this is going, and I think that these next 2 episodes are really fleshing out the characters. I think that because I had opinions about certain characters just walking in, that they were like good or bad. And that's one of the things about this. I mean, these are real people. Human nature is such that we are all complex characters and we have good sides, we have bad sides. So I did walk into this with some preconceived notions about several of I call them characters, even though these were real people. But I think episodes 2 and 3 are really starting to make me change my mind and make me see people differently, which is what I really love about, all of this is that, nobody is 100% good, nobody's 100% bad. They all have motivations. And once we have an idea of why they are the way they are, then you're allowed to give them a little bit of grace and just understand their motivations. So let's get into this episode. I'm going to go out of order because a lot happened, but I'm just kind of chunk it into sections and just kind of talk through everything that happened with certain characters from the beginning to the end. So one of the things in this episode that was important was the masque that they were holding. So, they have these it's like a party or like a show that they would do at court, and folks would dance and they would play characters and things of that nature. So they were doing this masque, and everybody was there. It was King Edward, all of his folks, Mary, his sister, Elizabeth, his sister, Catherine Parr, his stepmother, and her new husband, Thomas Seymour, who was also his uncle. And I explained in my first video how all these people are related. So they're all there and they're having a good time. Everybody's laughing. And it seemed to be going well until they brought out a character who was supposed to be the Pope. And they are pretty much humiliating the Pope, to the point that at the end, somebody actually pees on that character. So as it's going, folks are laughing and they're having a great time, but Mary is beside herself because she's a devout Catholic. The Pope was the core of Catholicism, and most of the rest of the court, the king, Elizabeth, and the others are all Protestants, and she is visibly uncomfortable, and it gets to the point that she just gets up and leaves. The party goes on. Edward follows her out and asks her, what's going on. I like the exchange between the two of them because there's this weird place with Edward where he's the king, but he's also her little brother. And he's also a child. And so he cares about her. He cares about her feelings, but he's also trying to assert himself as the king. And he finds himself in these positions where he's like kind of towing the line. And this was one of those situations. So he tells her, so she, and again, this is a weird dynamic too, because he's her little brother. She's the firstborn of King Henry VIII, but she knows that he's the king and she has to be deferential to him. So there's all these different things kind of lingering in the background during their conversation. But essentially, she tells him that, she wasn't feeling well and that, they're mocking the king and that she decided to leave. And he sounds apologetic. He doesn't want to hurt her feelings and he's trying to make it better, but also stay in line with his Protestant faith. And so he tells her, you embarrassed me. And they have this exchange in which, she asks him if she has permission to leave because there's really no resolution to this conversation there and now, and probably never. She's a Catholic. She always will be. There's no changing that. And we'll see later in this episode, in the next episode, that she would rather leave court than to renounce her faith. And I don't think he wants that for her, but I think he feels like that's what he has to ask her to do. So she leaves. Later on, we see that she has a conversation with Sir Pedro, who is a knight, and he is from Spain. So they connect because he is from Spain, and they're both Catholics in a Protestant country. And they develop a little bit of a friendship, which we'll see plays out a little bit more in episode 3. And we're seeing that she's finding folks who are allies and who are looking to protect her because they know, although she is the king's daughter, she's in a vulnerable place because she is a Catholic. And back then, the division of religion was such a serious matter that people were murdered over it, and people were burned at the stake, and we've seen all types of things like that. Now, while that's unlikely to happen to Mary because of her rank, she does know that she is, I guess, in a sense, kind of behind enemy lines. So we see the beginning of this divide, or her discomfort with her place at court, and we see some friendships that she's starting to develop that are steeped in her mother's country, her mother's home country, which is Spain, and also in her Catholicism. She has a conversation with Elizabeth later where she tells her that she's starting to see the writing on the wall, and she wants Elizabeth to come and live with her. I guess she's trying to, rally some support because she's been around long enough to see how these things play out. I don't know how old Mary is at this point. I imagine she's probably in her early 20s, but her life at court, I mean, besides maybe the first 5 years of her life, it's been tumultuous. She's seen her mother get set aside. She's seen her father switch sides from Catholicism, separate from Rome, essentially. And she's seen when Elizabeth's mother, Anne Boleyn, came in and tried to initiate a reformation. Her mother was banished from court and forced to spend the last years of her life away. Mary was separated from her. So she's seen a lot, and it's not... she's aware of what's going on, and she's trying to I guess, get ahead of it. So she has a conversation with Elizabeth, and she's trying to tell her, you need to come and live with me. Catherine Parr is not as good a woman as we think she is. Look how she's disgraced our father, and she got married so quickly after his death. Elizabeth is on the fence because she is young and naive, and we learn later that she's just turning 15, so she's a child for all intents and purposes. And while I do think that she's committed to her brother and to her sister, she seems to have a motherly love for Catherine, although she was upset that Catherine married her crush, Thomas Seymour. But I also think she doesn't want to leave Chelsea Manor because Thomas is there, and there's something going on between them at this point. And, I think she thinks she's in love with him. So she's in a real precarious place. So they have that conversation. Speaking about Catherine Parr, now in the beginning, that's when I said where I had certain opinions about people. And following all of this, Catherine had been Henry's final wife. There was no love there. She was pretty much selected and said, hey, you have to marry this man. So I had some sympathy for her coming into this, just knowing a little bit of the backstory. But as I watch her and Thomas scheme to get some power, be it, they realize that they've lost some power in that Edward is under the wing of Lord Somerset. So now they're trying to use Elizabeth and Lady Jane Grey. And it's just, I'm not so much of a fan of hers anymore. And I guess I'm losing, not that I was a fan, I guess I'm losing, I don't feel as sympathetic towards her. I've seen these conversations, she has with with Thomas. They're arguing over the jewels because the Lord Somerset, the Lord Protector, wants to take them back because he says technically they are the crown, they're jewels of the crown, and you're no longer affiliated with the crown because you're not a queen anymore, you're not married. She wants to keep them. Her and Thomas argue because he's like, these are trinkets, and you say how much you hated your husband, and why would you want to hold on to this? But she says they're her property, which I understand. And she also did make a huge sacrifice in marrying this man because he was a lot older than her. He was sickly by the time they got married. I imagine it just was not, it wasn't a relationship made out of love. And towards the end of his life, he started to allow other people to get in his ear. Some of her folks were pulled up, were brought to trial for their religious beliefs. And had Henry not died when he did, there were some people who think that she might have been accused of treason and put on the block, so to speak. I mean, he had done it twice before, so it wasn't far-fetched. So I say this all to say that she did go through a lot in being married to Henry, and perhaps she felt like, these are mine, I've kind of earned these. But Thomas tells his brother that he can take them. We see later that Thomas and Catherine have a huge argument. See, this is where I can even understand the power play where you're trying to keep Elizabeth and Jane, close by because you know that they have potential power. I am not even mad at that because that's kind of what everybody did. But she's seeing how Thomas is flirting with Elizabeth. She sees it. She's commented on it. And it's not until the next episode does it come to a head. But all this time, why would you think it's okay for this grown man to flirt with this child? And there's got to be another way if you want to keep her close to you, if you want to utilize her for her rank and for her position. There are other ways to do this, besides being nice to her and teaching her things. And, later they're going to throw her a birthday party. This flirting thing is it's just dangerous. It's in poor taste. It's cruel in a sense because you're making Elizabeth believe something that's not there. So the fact that Catherine is giving this the green light just for the sake of power isn't sitting well with me. Same thing with Thomas. I went into this thinking Thomas was the good guy and his brother, Lord Somerset, was the bastard. Because in other stories, like the Tudors, that's kind of how they set it up. So like as if Edward Seymour was this evil person and his brother was decent. But now I'm starting to look at it a little different. Like Thomas with this scheming, I mean, apparently he's a drunk. And then this flirting with Elizabeth, and it's more than flirting at this point. It's just inappropriate on so many different levels, and I'm not a fan. Now he's a handsome man, and that's how they get you, because when you're nice to look at, you set aside other things, but all in all, this is not a good guy. We see that Elizabeth is trying to assert her independence here. Like I said before, she has been on a very short leash all this time because she is a princess, and she still has an attendant who watches over her. It makes sense, she's still a young lady, but they go hunting, and she is very good on a horse. And she shoots the stag, and then she goes and she actually puts it out of its misery. And it's dangerous. It was a dangerous move, but she went ahead and did it, and everybody was shocked, and some folks disapproved because she could have been hurt. But this is her way of just stepping outside of this cell that she's been in for her whole life, and just trying to be more, to do the things that she wants to do, and also send a message to everybody else that she is not some little girl, although she is. So back to Elizabeth. After she has a conversation with Mary, she speaks to Catherine, and she's annoyed with Catherine right now because Catherine went ahead and married Thomas. But ironically, she's not mad at Thomas. You see how that goes. But she tells Catherine that she wants to go live with her sister, and Catherine can't let this happen because she is her pawn. So she convinces her not to. She appeals to her as a stepmother, kind of like as a big sister. She tells her that Mary has some ambition. She should be, I guess, mindful or cautious of her sister because, her sister might try to assert her right to the throne, because Mary still has connections to Spain and to the Pope, and that she might be trying to be queen one day. She uses these tactics to get in Elizabeth's head and to, I guess, in a sense, cause a divide between Elizabeth and Mary, and essentially to keep Elizabeth in her home, which is what happens. Elizabeth falls for it because, again, she is a naive young woman, and she decides that she's going to stay. Mary has another conversation with Edward in which he tells her he wants her to denounce her religion, and that's not going to happen. So I think this is the final straw for her, where she realizes that she might be in trouble here. She writes a letter to Elizabeth. She goes to one of her other homes, and she writes a letter to her sister, asking for her help, to ally with her, to try to talk to their brother, to make this right. Elizabeth, we see her kind of vacillating on, where does she stand with this? These are her siblings. She is a Protestant by faith. And eventually she responds to Mary's letter and tells her that she's siding with Edward. And we see how this is going to play out in episode 3. Another scene worth noting was the council meeting. So we know that Lord Somerset is the Lord Protector. And he is, basically the ruler of England at this time until Edward comes of age. He and Lady Jane Grey's father, Henry Grey, is at the council meeting. He had got kicked out during the first one, but apparently he's back. And he is going back and forth with Lord Somerset about this war in Scotland. He's saying that we believe that the war had been won. Why should we keep throwing money at this? And Lord Somerset, and he's a character that now I'm starting to gain more respect for, because he came off as such a tyrant in the first episode. But the more I listen to him and the more I see his interactions with his brother Thomas, who now I'm starting to think is a heel, I'm starting to understand why Lord Somerset might be the way he is. I mean, he seems like somebody who, while he does want power, he does seem like he follows the rules, and he is kind of by the book. And people who are not by the book piss him off. And he seems like he protects the code and how things are supposed to be. So that's probably, and I know him and his brother have some stuff in their childhood, and I'm not positive what his issue is with Henry Grey, but he seems like he doesn't like people who he deems weak or selfish or lazy, or like he just seems like he has a high work ethic, for lack of a better word. And even in his interactions with Mary, while, he does want her to renounce the faith, and I think I see where he's trying to create some kind of peace for the sake of the country, which is another reason why he wanted to go to Scotland to get Lady Mary, Queen of Scots, to bring her back to marry King Edward. But he has this exchange with Henry Grey in which he tells him, you're just being cheap. You don't want to go in your pockets. And this was the best line. Like, I had to rewind this scene like 3 times, and I actually wrote it down. He tells Henry, your chair remains empty to me even as you sit in it. Essentially meaning you're not here. And I could kick you out of this council again if I need to. Like, you need to just shut up. But that line, I swear I laughed out loud because it was so cutting and it was so to the point, but then with that British accent and the proper English, it just sounds so good coming out of his mouth. And what can you say after that? And Henry, I believe this is the scene where Henry might have started crying, or he just shut up or whatever, but it definitely hit home because Henry keeps trying to throw out the fact that his mother and the king are cousins, which is true, but that seems to be your only leverage to be at court. And now you're using your daughter. So, and we'll see later in episode 3 how he treats his daughter, which makes him even more of a heel. But now that I'm starting to realize who Lord Somerset's enemies are and the character of those people, I'm starting to have more respect for Edward Seymour. That doesn't mean he's a good guy, doesn't mean he's perfect, but I'm just starting to see how these dynamics are playing out. But I thought that was an excellent scene. So at the very end, we see that Mary has received Elizabeth's letter in which Elizabeth is essentially telling her, like, I am going to side with my brother. And now Mary feels like she's on the outs, and we will see next week how she handles this. Great episode. We're starting to peel back the layers. One of my subscribers on YouTube had commented that I originally thought this was a good standalone. I thought if you had never followed any of these other shows or the history of it, you'd be able to get it. But he mentioned that it really isn't that. It's like, this is kind of for people who are steeped in the storyline because there's so much backstory. And because I've been following it, I guess I didn't see it that way because some of it was just made sense to me. But I think without the context of Henry's life in totality and, all of this, the shifts and changes and the power struggles that happened during his reign, that really lends some texture to these characters and to the background and why people are so fearful. You don't understand, like, well, why would Mary be so upset? Well, because, her brother's a different faith. But knowing all the things that happened during her father's reign, it makes sense. Knowing about all of the even before Henry was born, it was like a civil war basically in England, which led like what they call the War of the Roses. And that's why Henry was so intent on getting a male heir, because up until then, there were the country was split in two as to who should be the king. And heirs do solidify one's role as a king. I mean, it creates like a dynasty where it just keeps going and going and going. But when somebody doesn't, especially when somebody dies without heirs, now it's just a crapshoot. and everybody and their mother who has any kind of connection or lineage attached to the king or to royalty will throw in their hat. Some people will try it, other people will fight for it, and that's essentially what his father did. I mean, he won his crown on the battlefield, literally. So they all remember what that looked like, and nobody wants to go back to that, which is why they are so intent on getting power and solidifying their role, because they know how bad things can get when that's not the case. I mean, you know, they have to worry about Scotland and France, but also an internal war, and nobody wants to see that again. So I say this all to say that this story is complex, and, you know, that would kind of lend to the characters and how we got here. But I mean, I guess if you haven't watched all the stuff before, you still can watch, and it's still entertaining. And I guess over time, it will still kind of just flesh out a little bit more so that it makes more sense. But I thought this was good. I did watch episode 3. I'm not prepared to do a review on it because I just have to look through my notes. But hopefully I will do that tomorrow so that I will be up to date. But it's going good. I really enjoyed it. And please drop down in the comments and let me know what you thought. And then we'll just go from there. So thank you again for watching, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.